We're about to begin a brand new love journey. Comment where you're watching from so we can see that our Soul Stories family is all around the world. Adrian Parker adjusted the collar of his faded navy cotton t-shirt. Below it were worn-out jeans and scuffed leather boots. In the reflection of the cafe window, he saw a man entirely different from the CEO who appeared on the cover of Forbes in a luxurious Italian suit. Instead, he looked like just another ordinary guy, a little out of place on a late weekend afternoon in Seattle. For months now, Adrian had gotten used to disguising himself as a nameless, middle-class man on dates. He was tired of the calculating glances, of the gentle smiles that only appeared once women heard the word billionaire. What he longed for was simple: someone who would look him straight in the eye, listen to him, and love the real man, not his bank account or his oceanfront mansion. Today's blind date had been arranged by Camilla, his personal assistant. She had insisted that if he kept his heart locked away forever, he would never find anyone. "You need someone real, Adrian," she had told him, "and I have a feeling this woman will surprise you." With a sigh, Adrian pushed open the cafe door. The smell of roasted beans mingled with the whir of grinders and the clink of cups. The place was cozy, not pretentiously upscale, yet not too plain either. Perfect for a man pretending to be a modest freelancer. He took a seat near the window, his eyes flicking to his watch. His business habits allowed him to arrive 20 minutes early. While mulling over how to start a conversation without giving himself away, the door opened. A woman hurried in, her breath quick as if she'd been running. Her thick black hair, loosely curled, had escaped a rushed bun. She wore a simple white blouse, blue jeans, and carried a worn fabric tote. Her face still carried traces of exhaustion, but her warm brown eyes lit up as soon as she spotted him. "Sorry, I'm late," she said as she came over. Her voice was soft yet full of energy. "The babysitter was late, then there was traffic. But I'm here now. I'm Elena. You must be Adrian?" Adrian jumped up, extending his hand politely. "That's right. It's so nice to meet you, Elena. Don't worry, I just got here myself." A small lie, but one he knew well. Elena smiled, and the expression transformed her face. Her eyes seemed to smile along with it. Adrian suddenly realized he'd been staring at that smile longer than he should. Once they sat down, he noticed Elena's gaze briefly sweep over his plain outfit, hesitating slightly. She didn't ask, only suggested, "Shall we order?" "This place has pretty good coffee," he smiled. "You choose." Elena scanned the menu, bit her lip lightly, and settled on a cup of house blend, the cheapest option. "Just coffee," she said quickly, as if afraid to trouble him. Adrian suggested they try the cafe's famous lemon scones. After a moment's hesitation, she agreed, giving him a shy smile that unexpectedly eased his heart. They began to talk. Adrian carefully stayed in character as a freelance web developer with enough income to get by, but nothing extra. Elena spoke about her job teaching preschool. When she described her 5-year-olds, their innocence, and their hilarious little mishaps, her whole face lit up. Her eyes sparkled, her voice sped up, brimming with passion. "How long have you been doing this?" Adrian asked. "About 5 years," Elena replied. "Sometimes chaotic, sometimes exhausting, but it's the best job in the world. I love kids. They're always honest, always curious, and luckily it works with my schedule since I have a 6-year-old daughter, Grace." Adrian tilted his head, genuinely interested. "Grace? That's a beautiful name. What's she like?" Elena laughed, her pride showing. "Oh, she insists unicorns are just horses wearing fabulous accessories. She's lively, smart, and very stubborn." Adrian laughed with her. In that moment, the distance between a billionaire and a single mom seemed to vanish. He felt himself being drawn into her simple world, where happiness was measured not in bank balances, but in children's stories, in the sudden smiles of those around her. As the conversation flowed, Adrian felt strangely at ease. He didn't have to talk about million-dollar deals or keep up his constant mask of cool detachment. In front of Elena, he was simply Adrian, an ordinary man listening and sharing. By the time they left, dusk had settled outside. Adrian courteously walked Elena to her car, a worn Honda Civic with a small booster seat in the back. She opened the door, turned to him with a warm smile and said, "Thank you for tonight. It was much nicer than I expected." Adrian replied softly, "Me too." I'm really glad I came. As the car pulled away, he stood watching after her. Inside him stirred a strange feeling, as if this unusual blind date had opened a new door. A door to something he didn't yet dare to name, but knew was unlike any meeting before. And he knew Elena's smile, along with the name Grace, would stay with him all night. In the days that followed, Adrian and Elena's meetings gradually became a routine, not noisy, not flashy, just centered on the simplest things. They met at the small cafe on the corner of Ravenna, where Adrian ordered Elena a cappuccino, while he stayed loyal to his house blend. This time, Elena no longer hesitated to ask for a butter cookie for Grace, who sat perched in a little high chair. "Thank you, Mr. Adrian," Grace mumbled, her wide eyes sparkling as she lifted the cookie to her mouth, cheeks puffing out like a tiny squirrel. Adrian chuckled. "She's such a sweet kid." Elena shook her head. "You haven't seen her when she's stubborn. But yes, Grace does have a way of winning people over." Adrian nodded, his gaze brushing over Elena's smile, the kind of smile that lit up Seattle's damp morning. One weekend afternoon, the three of them went to Central Park. Grace ran across the grass, clutching a worn pink ball, her curly hair bouncing in the afternoon sun. "Mr. Adrian, play ball with me," Grace called out. Adrian glanced at Elena, a little unsure. He was used to multi-million-dollar negotiations, not chasing a 6-year-old across the lawn, but then he shrugged off his jacket and joined Grace's impromptu soccer match. Laughter rang through the park. Grace giggled wildly, and Adrian, in his old jeans and heavy boots, felt as light as a child. Each time he let her win, Elena laughed along from the sidelines, her eyes glowing with rare joy. When they finally rested under a tree, Elena opened the lunchbox she'd brought, simple chicken sandwiches and sliced apples. "Nothing fancy," she said a little shyly, "but I thought eating outside like this would be more fun." Adrian bit into the sandwich, chewing slowly. He had never sat on damp grass eating such a modest meal, yet to him it tasted better than any dish from a 5-star restaurant. Another time, they took Grace to the Children's Museum. The three of them joined the science exhibit, where Grace squealed in delight watching a ball float on a stream of air. Adrian crouched beside her, watching every excited expression. In that moment, he felt as though he belonged here with this warm little family. "You seem good with kids," Elena remarked softly as they sat on a bench, waiting for Grace to finish a puzzle game. Adrian smiled faintly. "I've never thought so, but maybe it's because of Grace." Elena looked at him, her eyes softening. "She doesn't usually open up to people so quickly. With you, it's like she's known you forever." Adrian felt his chest tighten. The more time he spent with Elena and Grace, the more attached he became, and the more guilty. He wasn't the freelance programmer he claimed to be. He was a billionaire, living in a luxurious penthouse, and every moment of this charade weighed heavily on him. One evening, after Grace had fallen asleep in her grandmother's arms, Adrian and Elena sat together at their usual cafe. Outside, a light drizzle fell, the golden glow of the lamps reflecting in the glass. Elena propped her chin on her hand and sighed. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not strong enough to carry it all." Adrian stayed quiet, waiting. "Being a single mom isn't easy. Teaching, taking care of Grace, stretching every dollar. I'm afraid she'll grow up feeling deprived, afraid she'll blame me one day for not giving her a complete family." She gave a faint, uneasy smile. "But then I tell myself, as long as there's love, Grace will be fine. At least she always knows I'm here for her." Adrian didn't answer right away. He simply reached out, brushing the back of her hand with his fingers. "Elena, you're stronger than you think, and Grace is lucky to have a mother like you." Elena looked up, her brown eyes shimmering with emotion. She wasn't used to being encouraged, especially by a man she'd only just begun to know. In that instant, Adrian realized he was in deep. This was no longer just an experiment to avoid gold diggers. He truly wanted to be with Elena, to protect both her and Grace from every hardship. But another thought haunted him. If the truth came out that he was a billionaire, that his stories of an ordinary life were a lie, would this trusting gaze vanish forever? When they left the cafe, Adrian drove Elena home. On the porch, she smiled softly. "Thank you for listening. I don't often have someone to share with." Adrian only nodded, hiding the turmoil inside. He wanted to say more to promise she would never have to face things alone again, but the unspoken truth held his words back. Driving home through the glowing city streets, Adrian wondered, how much longer could he keep up this disguise? And when it shattered, what would happen to the feelings he now treasured? One thing he knew for sure, it was already too late to turn back, because his heart, through these simplest of dates, already belonged to Elena and Grace. Seattle's night wore a shimmering cloak of thousands of lights reflecting off the waters of Elliott Bay. The sea breeze carried a salty tang, tossing a few strands of Elena's hair as she stood beside Adrian, leaning against the old wooden railing. In the distance, docked boats swayed, leaving blurred streaks of light across the rippling waves. "It's been so long since I have had an evening like this," Elena murmured, her voice blending with the sound of the tide. An evening just to breathe, without worrying about work or running around after Grace. Adrian turned to look at her, the glow from the street lamps casting a deeper hue into her brown eyes. In that moment, he wanted to shed every disguise and tell her the truth that he wasn't the middle-class man standing beside her, but a billionaire trembling at the thought of losing her trust. "I'm so glad to be here with you," Adrian replied, his voice low. But then Elena tilted her head slightly, suspicion flickering in her gaze. "Adrian," she began hesitantly, "have you ever hidden something from me?" Adrian froze, his heart tightening. "Why would you think that?" Elena bit her lip, her eyes drifting away toward the sea. "It's just, sometimes you seem evasive. When I ask about your work, you only speak vaguely. When I ask where you live, you say nearby. But I've never seen where you actually live. Sometimes it feels like you're building a wall between us." Her words cut straight into Adrian's deepest fear. He inhaled sharply, his hand gripping the railing. It was time to tell the truth before the lie destroyed everything. "Elena," he turned to her, his tone serious, "there's something I need to tell you. Something important. And you might be angry with me, but..." He didn't get the chance to finish. "Mom!" Both of them spun around. On the lawn behind them, Grace, who had been running nearby, had tripped over a stone and fallen hard. Elena gasped and rushed over. "Grace, are you okay?" The little girl burst into tears, clutching her forehead where blood was beginning to show. Adrian's heart clenched as he ran to them, seeing the red smear on her delicate skin. "This isn't good. We need to get her to the hospital now," Adrian said firmly. Without waiting for Elena's response, he swiftly scooped Grace into his arms and hurried to the car. That night was a blur of tension in the emergency room, the sharp smell of antiseptic, harsh neon lights, and the crackle of hospital announcements pressing down on the air. Adrian sat next to Elena, his hand never leaving her shoulder as if to lend her strength. The doctor came out and explained that the wound wasn't serious, a small cut that needed a few stitches, with overnight observation to rule out a mild concussion. Elena exhaled in relief, tears streaming down her face. She gripped Adrian's hand for the first time without hesitation. "Thank you. If you hadn't been there, I don't know what I would have done." Adrian only squeezed her hand, silent. Inside him rose a feeling unlike anything else, not the thrill of closing a big deal, not the pride of seeing his name in the papers, but the relief of having protected them in time. He stayed with Elena at the hospital through the night. Grace slept soundly after being stitched up, her small face pale yet still innocent. Adrian brought Elena hot coffee and then sat back on the stiff chair, eyes heavy but refusing to close. In those long hours, he realized he couldn't delay any longer. The life he had fabricated was becoming a trap closing in on him, and Elena deserved the truth. Watching her gently smooth Grace's hair, her eyes full of maternal love, Adrian felt his heart grow heavy. He wanted to stay beside them, not as a man pretending to be ordinary, but as himself, with nothing hidden. By dawn, the hospital had quieted. Adrian stood in the hallway, staring out the window. The first rays of sunlight streaked across the distant high-rises. He told himself, enough. Tomorrow, when everything calmed down, he would tell her everything. Because if he kept hiding, he knew he would lose her, the woman he had never expected, but now couldn't bear to let go. The morning after a long night at the hospital, soft sunlight streamed through the window of the hospital room, casting a pale golden glow across Grace's small face. She slept soundly, her breathing steady, the stitches on her forehead neatly bandaged. Elena sat beside the bed, dark circles under her eyes, but her gaze had softened. Her daughter was safe. Adrian returned with a paper tray, 2 cups of hot coffee and a small box of toast. Setting it down on the table, he gave a faint smile. "I thought you could use a little caffeine." Elena looked up, a brief smile flashing before it quickly faded. Last night, she had leaned on him, let herself be comforted by his steady presence. But now, with Grace out of danger, the questions left unanswered the night before came flooding back. "Adrian," her voice was low but firm, "there's something I need to know. Are you hiding something from me?" Adrian froze, his hand unconsciously tightening around the hot coffee cup until it burned. This was the moment he had prepared for all night, and it had come sooner than he expected. He drew in a deep breath. "Elena, you deserve to know the truth. I'm not just a regular freelancer like I said." Elena frowned, her heart sinking. "What do you mean?" Adrian swallowed hard, locking his gaze with her brown eyes. "My name is Adrian Parker, yes, but I'm the CEO of Parker Technologies. I founded the company, and," his voice caught in his throat, "I'm a billionaire." Silence fell over the room. The steady beep of a monitor from the next bed seemed to stretch the distance between them. Elena stared at him, her eyes wide first with shock, then gradually with hurt. She let out a dry laugh, utterly humorless. "So you're telling me everything I believed these past weeks was a lie?" "Elena, I didn't—" Adrian stepped closer. "I never lied about how I feel. I only pretended to be poor?" She cut in sharply, keeping her voice low so Grace wouldn't wake. "You told me about freelancing, about living in a modest apartment, about watching every dollar. But in reality, you live in a penthouse and could buy this whole street if you wanted to." Adrian lowered his head, his hands trembling slightly. I was afraid. The women before you only came to me for money. I needed to know you were here for me. And you thought I was like them?" Her eyes blazed, but beneath the fire was a pain she couldn't hide. "You thought I, a teacher raising a child on a modest salary, needed some kind of test to prove myself?" Adrian opened his mouth, but no words came. He realized any excuse would be meaningless against the hurt in her eyes. Elena turned away, drawing a deep breath to hold back tears. "I'm not hurt because you're wealthy, Adrian. I'm hurt because you didn't trust me. You stepped into my life and Grace's life without being honest. You turned every story, every moment into a performance." The words hit him like a punch to the chest. He had expected anger, maybe even rejection. But he had never imagined this, her voice heavy with disappointment, tearing him apart from the inside. He reached out instinctively to touch her shoulder, but Elena pulled back, her eyes colder than the wind outside the window. "I need time, Adrian. Please, go." In that moment, everything around him seemed to collapse. The sunlight outside no longer warm, the coffee on the table no longer fragrant. All that remained was a distance that could not be bridged. His lips trembled as he whispered, "I'm sorry, Elena." Then he turned and walked out, each step heavier than stone. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Elena by Grace's bedside. At last, she could no longer hold back her tears. She looked down at her sleeping daughter, her chest tight. She didn't know what hurt more, Adrian's deception or the fact that she had allowed her heart to trust a man who wasn't who she thought he was. As for Adrian, stepping into the hospital corridor bathed in cold, sterile light, he knew he had just lost the most precious thing of all, not his company, not his fortune, but the trust of the woman he truly loved. After that morning at the hospital, Adrian left with a hollow ache in his chest. In the days that followed, he buried himself in work at Parker Technologies, but no report, no multi-million-dollar meeting could stop him from thinking about Elena's brown eyes filled with disappointment. Inside his vast office with glass walls overlooking Seattle, Adrian sat motionless in front of a black computer screen. Outside, rain pattered against the windows, each drop like a reminder of the tears Elena had shed. He blamed himself. Why had he been so afraid? Why hadn't he told the truth from the beginning? He had wanted to prove he could be loved for who he was, yet in the end, he had destroyed the most precious trust he'd ever been given. Across the city in the small house in Ravenna, Things weren't easier for Elena. She still went to teach her classes, still smiled at the children. But when night fell, memories of Adrian came rushing back. She remembered the way he had carried Grace so swiftly through the night when she fell. Remembered the gentleness with which he had stayed for hours at the hospital, never leaving their side. All of it had been real, and that was what hurt most. He might be a billionaire, he might live in a penthouse. But why had he chosen deception, Elena thought, her hand unconsciously tightening around her teacup. Grace, however, was different. She knew nothing of lies or status. For several nights in a row, just before bed, she would ask, "Mommy, why doesn't Mr. Adrian come anymore? I want to tell him about the picture I drew at school today." Each time Elena's heart ached, she stroked her daughter's soft curls and forced a smile. "Mr. Adrian's busy with something, sweetheart. He'll come back," but inside she didn't know if that was true. On the fourth day after their confrontation at the hospital, while Grace napped, Elena sat silently in the kitchen. Pale golden light fell across the wooden table, the only sound the stillness around her. She held her phone, hesitating for a long time before finally sending a message to Adrian. "If you still want to talk, come tonight. 7 p.m. Grace will be at her grandmother's, just the two of us." The message was sent. Her heart raced, a mixture of nerves and relief. At exactly 7 p.m., there was a knock on the door. Adrian stood there, not in the faded t-shirt and worn boots, nor in his usual expensive suit. He had chosen a simple white shirt and dark jeans, his face tired but his eyes resolute. "Elena," he said softly. She stepped aside, motioning for him to enter. The familiar small living room, the old fabric sofa, the faint scent of lavender from the oil diffuser. This space was the opposite of the luxurious world Adrian had once hidden. But to him, this felt more like home. They sat facing each other. Neither spoke at first. Finally, Adrian pulled a small black USB drive from his jacket pocket and set it on the table. "This is everything about me," he said, his voice hoarse. "Company records, articles, personal photos, proof of who I really am. Not just the CEO, but Adrian from the very beginning. Even pictures from college, of my parents. Everything. I don't want you to just take my word for it. You have the right to see for yourself and decide." Elena stared at the USB as though it were something both trustworthy and dangerous. She looked up, her gaze sharpening. "Why are you only doing this now? After everything?" Adrian took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. "Because I was afraid. I've never been so afraid of losing anyone. But you're right, if I stepped into your life and Grace's. I have to be honest. I don't want there to be a single secret left between us." Elena was silent. The ticking of the wall clock filled the room, each second heavy. She picked up the USB drive, turning it over in her hand, the metal glinting in the soft yellow light. "You know, Adrian," she said quietly, her voice tight, "I don't hate you for being rich. I just hate feeling like I was part of some test. I trusted you. I let Grace trust you. And in return, you built a facade." "Elena, I'm sorry," Adrian said immediately, his tone earnest. "I regret hurting you. I'm not asking for forgiveness right away. I'm only asking that you consider giving me another chance. A chance to prove I can be completely honest." Elena set the USB back down on the table and sighed. There was still hurt in her eyes, but it was no longer a slammed door the way it had been days ago. "I'll look at it," she said slowly. "But remember this, Adrian. If we start over, it has to be from zero. No half-truths, no pretending, no ambiguity. All or nothing." A spark of hope flickered in Adrian's eyes, like finding a glimmer of light in thick darkness. He nodded firmly. "I promise. Total honesty from now on." Elena didn't reply. She rose, walked to the door, and opened it gently. "Now go. I need time." Adrian stood, looking at her one last time. In his eyes, determination and hope mingled with the fear of losing everything. He gave a small nod, then stepped out into the light drizzle. When the door closed, Elena leaned against it, gripping the USB tightly in her hand. Her heart still ached, but deep inside the pain there was a whisper. Maybe he really does want to change. A week had passed since the night Adrian brought the USB. Elena still hadn't made a final decision, but she hadn't cut off contact either. That in itself was a sign. Adrian understood he had to be patient. Once trust is broken, it can't be rebuilt overnight. Finally, on a Saturday afternoon, with sunlight lingering on the rooftops of Ravenna, Elna sent him a brief message. Grace keeps asking about you. If you'd like, come to the park with us tonight. Adrian read the message 3 times, his heart beating faster than it had during any board presentation. He typed back, I'll be there. 6 o'clock. That evening, the park was filled with the sound of children's laughter. Grace wore a pink dress printed with ponies, and the moment she spotted Adrian from afar, she squealed, Mr. Adrian! She ran toward him, her tiny legs skipping. Adrian knelt, arms open. The feel of her small arms wrapping around his neck warmed his heart in a way he couldn't explain. Did you miss me? Adrian asked, his voice thick. Yes, I drew a picture for you. Grace pulled a sheet of colored paper from her little bag. On it, she had drawn 3 people holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. Adrian froze. He looked at the drawing, then up to catch Elena watching from a distance. She gave him a faint smile, not full trust yet, but no longer the guarded distance of before. The evening passed in simple ways, kicking a ball with Grace, eating ice cream on a park bench, telling fairy tales under the streetlights. Adrian didn't try to justify himself or revisit his mistakes. He simply listened to Elena and Grace, letting his presence become a natural part of the air around them. On the drive home, with Grace asleep in the back seat, Elena spoke softly. I watched everything on the USB. It was all true. Adrian's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his voice trembling slightly. I promised I wouldn't hide anything from you again. If there's anything else you want to know, just ask. Elena stayed silent for a moment, then sighed. I still don't know if I can forgive you, but I want to try. For Grace and for myself. Adrian nodded hard. That's all I've hoped for. In the days that followed, they embarked on a new journey, not secret meetings anymore, but moments shared openly, with Grace present, the truth existing between them. One Sunday morning, Adrian came to Elena's house carrying a box of waffle mix from his childhood memories. The 3 of them made waffles together in the small kitchen. Grace squealed with delight as she poured the batter, and Elena laughed at Adrian fumbling with the wooden spoon. Amid the laughter, the tension between them eased a little more. Another time, Adrian took Elena and Grace for a walk along the shore of Whidbey Island. He didn't hide the fact that it was one of his private properties. He led them to a small, newly renovated cabin and said quietly, This is where I come for peace. I want you and Grace to feel it too. Elena was surprised, but this time she didn't turn away. She stepped into the cabin, taking in the old photos on the walls, Adrian as a student, his parents, a real part of his life, with nothing hidden. Most important of all, Adrian brought Elena to Parker Technologies headquarters, the place he had once kept off limits. He didn't want her to feel excluded from his world anymore. At the foot of the towering glass lobby, Elena hesitated. Are you sure? This is your company, and I'm just... Adrian smiled, placing his hand gently on her back. You're the one I want to share everything with. He guided her through each department, introducing his closest colleagues. When they met Camilla, Adrian's assistant, she grinned playfully at Elena. Finally, I get to meet the woman who made my boss skip piles of meetings just to go to the park. Elena flushed while Adrian laughed without embarrassment. He let her see who he was in both worlds, the glamorous world of business and the simple world where he'd found happiness. That night, when Adrian drove Elena and Grace home, Grace was already fast asleep in the back seat. Elena sat quietly, watching her daughter's peaceful face. Then she said softly, Do you know what hurt me the most? Not your wealth. It felt like being shut out of a part of your life, like you didn't trust me enough to let me in. Adrian met her eyes. I was wrong. But I want you to know, starting now, you and Grace can walk into every part of my life. There will be no more closed doors. Elena gave a small nod, making no promises, but in her eyes the coldness had eased, replaced by a faint warmth. In the days that followed, they continued to build. Evenings at Elena's house, Adrian read stories to Grace in a hoarse but patient voice. At lunch, Elena would call Adrian just to tell him funny stories from her class. Sometimes a simple text from Elena, "Are you okay?" was enough to fill Adrian's heart. Their relationship was no longer an experiment. It was slowly becoming a real beginning. And this time, not built on lies, but on sincerity, fragile perhaps, but enough for both of them to hold on to. Adrian knew the road ahead would be long and full of challenges. But when he saw Elena smiling beside Grace, he thought, if this is the family I can belong to, then every effort is worth it. Soul Stories fam, if you're watching on another channel, come home to us at Soul Stories, where tens of thousands of listeners and sharers come together. Late that afternoon, the Seattle sun poured honey gold light over the streets of Ravenna. Elena had just finished teaching, her heavy lesson bag weighing down one arm, her heart full of anticipation for a peaceful evening with Grace and Adrian. But as she stepped down the school steps, a familiar voice rang out behind her. Elena! She froze, her heart tightening instantly. It had been years since she last heard that voice. Slowly she turned. Standing at the school gates was Daniel Grace's biological father, the man who had abandoned her the moment he learned she was pregnant. Daniel had changed, still tall and broad-shouldered, but now dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his hair neatly styled, his eyes sharp with confidence. A luxury car idled at the curb, a clear symbol of his newfound success. Elena's body stiffened. Old feelings came flooding back, the pain of being left behind, the loneliness of caring and raising a child alone. Daniel, she said coldly, what are you doing here? He smiled, a touch of arrogance beneath the charm. I heard you were still in Seattle. And I wanted to see you. And Grace. The mention of her daughter's name cut through Elena like a blade. You have no right to say her name. You disappeared from her life the day she was born. Daniel lifted his hand, feigning regret. I know I was wrong. But things are different now. I've built a stable life, a career. I can take care of you and Grace. I want us to start over. Elena let out a bitter laugh. Start over? You abandoned me when I needed you most, and now that Grace and I are okay, you come back? Sorry, Daniel, but I don't need you. His eyes darkened. You call this okay? A preschool teacher's meager salary? You think that's enough for our daughter? Elena straightened, her voice firm. I may not be rich, but Grace grew up surrounded by love. She's happy, and that's what matters most. Daniel stepped closer, his voice dropping, colder. If you won't give me a chance, I'll find another way to be with Grace. I'm her father, Elena. The law's on my side. The veiled threat sent a chill down her spine, but Elena didn't flinch. You don't understand. She doesn't even know you exist. You think she'll call you Dad just because you have money? You're wrong, Daniel. Just then, Adrian appeared. He had come to pick up Elena, but he caught the tension between them. Elena, is everything okay? His voice was steady, protective. Elena turned to him, meeting his watchful, reassuring eyes. This is Daniel, she said flatly, Grace's biological father. Daniel looked Adrian up and down, his gaze sharp with challenge. And who are you? Adrian stepped forward, unfazed. I'm the one who's been here for Elena and Grace. The one the little girl trusts and loves. The calm in his voice made Daniel's expression tighten. So you've replaced me? No, Adrian replied firmly. You were never there to be replaced. The air between them grew heavy, thick with tension. Elena stepped in, unwilling to let the schoolyard turn into a battlefield. That's enough. Daniel, if you truly want to see Grace, I'll think about it. But don't you ever threaten me again. Daniel's lips curled into a cold smile. I won't give up. Grace is my daughter. I have rights. With that, he turned, got into his car, and drove off, leaving behind the echo of the engine in the weighted silence. Elena stood frozen, her hands trembling. Adrian stepped up beside her, his hands settling gently on her shoulder. Are you okay? She drew in a deep breath, forcing herself to steady. He really means to fight for custody. Adrian's eyes darkened as he looked in the direction Daniel's car had gone. A storm rose inside him, but he held it back. He wouldn't add to Elena's fear. Don't worry, Elena, he said firmly. I won't let you and Grace face this alone. If Daniel takes this to court, we'll face it together. Elena lifted her eyes to him and saw the unwavering strength in his gaze. For the first time in years, she felt safety not only from within herself, but from a man willing to stand beside her. She gave a small nod, tears welling. Thank you, Adrian. I just don't want Grace to get hurt. Adrian's hand pressed reassuringly on her shoulder. We'll protect her. At all costs. As the sunset faded into dusk, amid the looming uncertainty, an invisible yet unbreakable bond tied the three of them together, Adrian, Elena, and Grace. And Adrian silently vowed that no matter what battles lay ahead, he would never let that bond be broken. In the days after their confrontation at the school gates, Daniel did not disappear as Elena had hoped. Instead, he kept reappearing, like a nightmare that clung to her life. At first, it was the relentless phone calls in the evenings, his tone smooth but pressing. Elena, I want to see you. We need to talk. For Grace. Then came the expensive bouquets delivered straight to her school, each with a scrawled note. I want to make things right. Give me a chance. Every time Elena carried the flowers to the dumpster behind the building, her expression was cold despite the whispers from her colleagues. One afternoon, Daniel even waited outside the gates, smiling confidently as Elena and Grace walked out. I just want to take Grace out for ice cream. 1 hour, that's all. Elena pulled her daughter's hand firmly, her voice sharp. No, she doesn't need you, and neither do I. Grace looked between them, puzzled, not understanding, but held her mother's hand tighter. Daniel's eyes flickered with anger at the sight. For weeks, Elena lived in constant tension, always afraid he would show up again. She even changed her route to work and asked Adrian to pick up Grace more often, but Daniel would not let go. Then one day, as Elena was preparing lesson plans in an empty classroom, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Dear Ms. Rodriguez, I am the attorney representing Mr. Daniel Cooper. We have filed a petition requesting the court to review the legal custody of Grace Cooper. Please prepare to cooperate with us at your earliest convenience. The message, followed by an official envelope stamped with a glaring red seal, made Elena's world collapse. The words were few, but they carried the weight of everything she feared. Daniel had filed for custody of Grace. Elena sank into the kitchen chair, her hands trembling as she held the paper. Her vision blurred, the bold letters dancing before her eyes. Custody. Grace. Just the thought of losing her little girl made her chest seize as though someone had crushed her heart in their fist. In the living room, Grace sat happily coloring, humming softly, blissfully unaware that her mother's sky was cracking above her. No, I can't. I won't let this happen, Elena whispered, her voice breaking. She grabbed her phone and dialed Adrian. After only 2 rings, his worried voice came through. Elena. What's wrong? Daniel, he filed. He wants custody of Grace. Her voice broke, and then the sobs came. I'm on my way, Adrian said firmly, no hesitation. 15 minutes later, Adrian was at her door. He wasn't the CEO in a sharp suit, nor the man hiding behind a mask of power. He was just Adrian, the man who rushed into her home with determination in his eyes. He knelt before Elena, his warm hands enclosing hers. Listen to me. You won't have to fight this alone. Elena shook her head, tears streaming. Adrian, I'm so scared. He has money, influence. The court, if they think he's more stable, more capable. Adrian's grip tightened, his voice steady. Money isn't everything. What matters is who has truly raised Grace, who gives her love, stability, and safety. And that's you, Elena. Elena lifted her tear-filled eyes to him, clinging to the only light in the darkness. That very day, Adrian took action. He called an old acquaintance, Ethan Moore, one of Seattle's top family law attorneys. Ethan had once been Adrian's rival in corporate acquisitions, but in family law, he was known as someone who never lost a case. That evening, Ethan arrived at Elena's modest home, carrying a leather briefcase, polite but with sharp eyes. First, I need to hear your story, Ms. Rodriguez, he said calmly. Elena recounted everything, how Daniel had abandoned her when he learned she was pregnant, the years she had raised Grace alone, the sleepless nights worrying about rent, the nights Grace burned with fever in their small apartment. Her voice shook, but Ethan listened intently without interruption. When she finished, he nodded. That's crucial. The record shows Daniel has been absent from Grace's life for 6 years. Legally, he has visitation rights, but gaining custody is extremely difficult unless the court finds you unfit as a mother. Clearly, you've done more than enough. Elena exhaled, some relief breaking through her fear, but worry still shadowed her face. He has money, connections. Ethan glanced at Adrian, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Money and connections, we have those too. But what really matters here is the truth. And the truth is on your side. After the meeting, Ethan and his team began planning. Adrian didn't just hire Ethan. He assembled an entire support system, a child psychologist, an investigator to dig into Daniel's past, even a media advisor to protect Elena's image if the case leaked. Elena's warm little home transformed into a command center. The kitchen table was filled with files, Grace's birth certificate, and photos documenting 6 years of love between mother and daughter. Adrian sat beside Elena, helping her sort through old pictures. Grace on her first day of preschool, Grace blowing out candles at her 4th birthday, Grace clutching her mother's neck during a thunderstorm. Tears welled in Elena's eyes. This is our life. Proof that she's never lacked anything except a father who chose to leave. Adrian placed a steady hand on her shoulder. We'll show them. And you won't lose Grace. That night after Ethan left, Elena still sat dazed on the sofa. Adrian poured her a cup of tea and placed it gently in her hands. Elena, he said softly, I know this feels like your worst nightmare, but trust me, we'll get through this. She looked at him, her tired eyes filled with gratitude. Adrian, why are you doing all this for us? You don't owe me anything. Adrian was quiet for a moment before replying. Because I love you. Both of you. I can't stand by and watch you fight this alone. From this moment on, whether in court or in life, I'm here. His words, simple but unshakable, felt like a balm to her raw heart. For the first time all day, Elena's body eased. She nodded, clutching his hand. Thank you, Adrian. I really need you right now. Adrian smiled and bent down to press a tender kiss on her hand. I promise, Elena. We'll protect Grace, at all costs. Outside, the rain continued tapping softly against the eaves, but inside, a new determination was taking root. No matter how powerful Daniel's wealth and influence were, Adrian knew there was only one path forward, to stand by Elena and fight with everything he had to protect Grace's home. Night fell, and Seattle sank into a thick fog. In her small house, Elena lay restless in bed, eyes wide open against the dark ceiling. The ticking of the clock echoed like a gavel pounding in her chest. She hadn't slept for days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Grace being led away by the court to Daniel. She heard her daughter's cries, saw the small hand reaching out for her while she stood helplessly watching. Just the thought brought tears rushing, choking her breath. In the next room, Grace slept soundly, sometimes shifting in her sleep, clutching her old rag doll. The little girl was still innocent, unaware of the legal storm brewing ahead. But Elena feared that innocence wouldn't last. Daniel wasn't just suing, he was trying to get close to Grace. The thought that her daughter could be swayed, lured with promises from a father she had never known, made Elena's heart twist in agony. Adrian saw the toll it was taking on her. One morning he came by with hot coffee and found her sitting on the kitchen floor, hair disheveled, eyes ringed with exhaustion. Elena! He set the cup on the table and crouched beside her. She forced a smile. I'm fine. Just haven't been sleeping. Adrian met her eyes, his voice firm. No, you're not fine. And I can't let you keep carrying this alone. We need a break. Just a day or two. You, Grace, and me. Elena hesitated. But the trial is coming. The files, the paperwork. Ethan and the legal team are working nonstop. Trust me, Elena, they're the best there is. What you need right now isn't more documents. You need to breathe. Grace does too. To face court, you need strength. She was silent for a long time. In Adrian's steady gaze, she felt the safety she had been missing for years. Finally, she gave a small nod. All right, but only 2 days. Adrian drove them out of the city to a small coastal town a few hours from Seattle. The wooden cabin he rented stood right on the sand, its windows opening to the deep blue ocean. Grace squealed with joy the moment she saw the sea. Mommy! Mr. Adrian, are we really staying here? Adrian laughed, lifting her high into the air. Yes, princess. These 2 days are a special vacation just for the three of us. The sunlight glowed on the little girl's face, so bright and pure it melted Elena's heart. It had been so long since she'd seen Grace laugh that freely. That afternoon, they built a sandcastle together. Grace assigned the roles. Mr. Adrian digs the moat, Mommy makes the towers, and I decorate with seashells. Adrian followed her orders with mock seriousness, making Grace laugh until she toppled over in the sand. When the castle was finished, Grace raised her arms high and shouted, "This is our kingdom!" Then she slipped between them, holding both their hands. Her tiny fingers formed an invisible bridge, drawing Adrian and Elena's eyes to each other, where they shared a small, unguarded smile. That night, they sat around a fire pit outside the cabin, roasting marshmallows. Grace spun a fairy tale of her own invention, about a princess and a knight who protected her, never letting her fall into the hands of the villain. Adrian listened, nodding now and then, while Elena quietly watched him. In the flickering firelight, his face softened so much that her heart trembled. Late at night, when Grace was asleep, Elena and Adrian sat on the porch, watching the waves lap the shore. The night was still, the sea breeze brushing lightly past. Elena spoke first, her voice low and heavy. Adrian, I'm scared. I've never been this scared before. If I lose Grace, I don't know how I'd survive. Adrian placed his hand over hers, gripping it tightly. I know, but you won't lose her. I promise. You can't promise for the court. No, but I can promise this. I'll use everything I have to protect you and Grace. I won't let Daniel take what he never built. And Elena, you don't have to carry this alone anymore. Elena turned to him. In the dim light, Adrian's eyes shone with sincerity and resolve. His words weren't empty comfort. They were the vow of a man who had chosen to stand by her. She leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering, Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you. Adrian wrapped his arms around her. No more words were needed. For that moment, the fear and weight seemed to wash away with the tide. The next day, they took Grace to a small children's museum in town. She ran from one exhibit to another, eyes wide with wonder, calling out, Mommy, Mr. Adrian, come see this. Elena watched Adrian kneel down to her daughter's level, listening patiently, never missing a question. The sight carved itself deep into her heart. He was a real father, even without blood ties. Something shifted inside Elena. It was no longer just gratitude for Adrian's help or admiration for his strength. It was trust. Trust that with him by her side, she could withstand any storm. On their last night, after Grace had fallen asleep in the cabin, Elena whispered to Adrian, I used to think I could only rely on myself, but now I see. Leaning on someone doesn't mean you're weak. It means you found a greater strength. Adrian tilted her chin up, his eyes glimmering. And you can lean on me. Always. Their lips met in a gentle kiss, warm and certain. In that small cabin by the sea, with the waves whispering beyond the walls, a family was slowly taking shape, not just bound by blood, but by love, trust, and the will to protect one another. Elena smiled faintly against his chest, whispering like a vow to herself, I'm ready. For the trial. For everything. And Adrian held her close, knowing that from this moment forward, they would face every storm together. The first day of the custody hearing arrived under a heavy cloud. The courtroom was packed not because the case was famous, but because curiosity drew people in. A father who had vanished for years suddenly returning to fight for custody against the single mother who had raised the child alone. Elena sat at the petitioner's table, her hands ice cold as they clutched a worn handkerchief. Grace was in the children's waiting room down the hall, watched over by a social worker. Adrian sat beside Elena, his presence steady like an anchor. Across the aisle, Daniel appeared in a dark, tailored suit, flanked by a formidable legal team. His expression radiated confidence, as if the outcome was already his. The hearing began. Daniel's attorney, a gray-haired man with a sharp, cutting tone, rose first. Your Honor, sadly, the child Grace Cooper has lived for the past 6 years in a financially unstable environment. Her mother, Miss Rodriguez, is merely a preschool teacher with limited income. Financial records indicate that she has frequently struggled to pay rent with no significant savings. At times, she even relied on her mother's support. Is that truly the kind of environment suitable for a child? His words, polished and precise, cut like a blade. Elena felt her blood run cold. They were twisting her real sacrifices into weapons against her. The attorney pressed on. By contrast, my client, Mr. Daniel Cooper, is now a successful businessman with a stable income. He can provide his daughter with a comfortable life, full access to education, and the best opportunities. Should a biological father, fully capable of offering such a future, be denied custody of his own child? Whispers rippled through the gallery. Daniel lifted his chin, lips curving with self-assurance. Then it was Ethan Moore's turn, the family law attorney Adrian had brought in. Calm and razor-sharp, Ethan adjusted his glasses and began. Your Honor, we must not confuse financial status with love and stability. The record clearly shows that since the day Grace was born, the only person who has consistently cared for her, raised her, and provided her safety is her mother, Ms. Rodriguez. She has taken Grace to school, sat by her hospital bed through sickness, and provided everything on a modest teacher's salary. This child has never lacked love nor safety. He held up a stack of enlarged photographs. Grace in her mother's arms on her first day of school. Grace at a birthday party with a homemade cake. Grace in a hospital bed with Elena awake beside her. These are the bonds of motherhood, bonds no amount of money can buy. Meanwhile, Mr. Cooper on the other side has been absent for 6 years. He never contributed a single day of care, never paid regular support. Now that the child is older, he suddenly returns. That is not responsibility, that is calculation. Ethan's voice rang clear, and Elena felt her chest swell with gratitude. Around the courtroom, faces shifted from skepticism to empathy. Suddenly, Daniel leapt up, unable to stay silent. His voice cut through the room. She talks about love, but she's just leeching off another man. He jabbed a finger toward Adrian. For the past year, she's been living off him, a billionaire tech CEO. This isn't noble motherhood, it's dependence. She couldn't care for Grace without a man propping her up. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Elena froze, heat flooding her face. She wanted to shout back, but Ethan motioned for her to stay calm. Adrian rose instead, his tone steady, unwavering. Mr. Cooper, that's enough. I'm here not because Elena depends on me. She raised her daughter alone for 6 years. Where were you then? I stand here because I've seen firsthand a devoted mother and a child who deserves a safe home. I love them, and I choose to protect them. That's not dependency, that's trust, that's family. Ethan stepped in seamlessly, voice sharp as steel. Your Honor, Mr. Cooper's accusation only proves his contempt for the tireless work of a single mother. Elena Rodriguez gave her child love and stability long before Mr. Parker entered their lives. If anything, it is Mr. Cooper who leans on wealth and status to mask years of absence. The gallery's eyes turned, their judgment falling squarely on Daniel. His jaw tightened, but he had no answer. Next came the witnesses. Adrian was called to the stand. He stood tall, calm, his eyes burning with quiet resolve. Please state your name for the record, the judge said. My name is Adrian Parker. I have known Elena Rodriguez and her daughter Grace for nearly a year. Daniel's attorney leaned forward. Mr. Parker, what is your relation to the petitioner? Adrian answered firmly. I am not Grace's biological father. But I have been there at bedtime stories, during fevers, on family outings. I have witnessed firsthand that Grace is being raised in love and stability, which is what every child deserves. He paused, then looked directly at the judge. What matters most for a child is not wealth or prestige. It's a safe environment filled with love. Elena provides that every day. Grace is happy. That happiness is the strongest evidence. From her seat, Elena's heart surged. Never before had she seen someone stand so strongly to defend her. When Daniel finally testified, he tried to sound earnest. I made mistakes, yes, but I am Grace's father. I have the right to be near her, to guide her, to give her a brighter future. Should my past really erase my rights entirely? His words seemed emotional, but under Ethan's questioning, the cracks showed. Mr. Cooper, Can you recall the last time you were physically present for your daughter when she was ill? Daniel faltered. I, I was busy with work. And her most recent birthday, where were you then? Daniel hesitated. I sent a gift. Ethan pressed forward. Your Honor, this is the issue. Mr. Cooper treats his daughter as a title, a badge of honor to prove his success rather than a living child in need of daily love and care. Whispers of disapproval spread through the courtroom. Daniel snapped, She's my daughter. I have rights. But in the eyes of the judge and the spectators, his selfishness was laid bare. When the court recessed, Elena sat still, drained, but this time it was different. She was no longer trembling with despair. Beside her, Adrian clasped her hand, warm and steady. Do you see? He whispered. The truth is on your side. Grace isn't going anywhere. Elena squeezed his hand, her eyes shining. For the first time in weeks of fear and tension, real hope stirred in her chest. Thank you for being part of Soul Stories. If you're listening on another channel, come back to the official home so you can continue our love journeys together with the Soul Stories family. That morning, the courtroom was so silent that one could hear the anxious breathing of those involved. After days of heated arguments, presenting evidence, and questioning witnesses, everything now depended on the judge's ruling. Elena sat at the petitioner's table, her hands trembling uncontrollably, her eyes locked on the door to the deliberation room. Her heart pounded, each beat threatening to tear her chest apart. Beside her, Adrian squeezed her hand, a steady, wordless reassurance. Whatever the outcome, he was there. Across the aisle, Daniel sat tall, his face brimming with confidence. He kept whispering to his lawyer, lips curved in arrogance, as though victory was already his. Finally, the door opened. The judge, a stern, middle-aged woman, returned to the bench. The room instantly fell into absolute silence. Her voice rang out, slow but weighty. After reviewing all evidence, witness testimonies, and the real circumstances of both parties, the court issues the following ruling. The air turned thick, almost unbreathable. Elena felt her heart stop. The primary custody of the child, Grace Rodriguez, is hereby awarded to her mother, Miss Elena Rodriguez. The biological father, Mr. Daniel Cooper, shall have limited visitation rights according to a court-approved schedule, with supervision when deemed necessary. In that moment, Elena's world burst into light. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. All the tension, sleepless nights, and bottled fears came flooding out at once. Grace, I didn't lose you. I didn't lose you, she whispered like a prayer, clutching the tear-soaked handkerchief. Adrian wrapped his arms around her shoulders, holding her tight. I told you, he murmured, you and Grace will never be separated. Moments later, a court officer brought Grace back from the waiting room. The little girl ran forward, calling out, Mom! Mr. Adrian! Elena rushed to her, dropping to her knees and gathering her daughter in trembling arms. Sweetheart, Mommy's here. I'll always be here. No one can ever take you away. Grace blinked at her mother's tears and reached up with her tiny hand to wipe them away. Don't cry, Mommy. I'm here too. Adrian crouched beside them, his large hand enveloping their smaller ones. His eyes shone with happiness and fierce resolve. From today on, the three of us move forward together. No one will ever break us apart. Across the courtroom, Daniel stood frozen, his face drained, then flushed red with fury. The judge's ruling struck him like a slap to his pride. He leaned toward his lawyer, growling, We can appeal. But the lawyer shook his head, whispering, With this record and evidence, chances are slim. Pursuing it will only damage your reputation further. Daniel clenched his fists, his glare fixed on Elena and Adrian holding Grace in their warm embrace. To him, that picture wasn't a family. It was a bitter defeat. Snatching up his briefcase, he stormed out, the echo of his shoes against the tile sharp as knives cutting through the silence. When the door closed behind him, the room seemed to breathe again. Ethan, Elena's lawyer, stepped over, offering a rare smile. Congratulations, you've won. More importantly, Grace will continue to have a peaceful childhood with her mother. Elena nodded through tears, grasping his hand. Thank you. Without you and Adrian, I don't know what I would have done. Adrian placed a steadying hand on her back. You were never alone, Elena. This was a battle for all three of us. Elena turned to him, eyes red but glowing with a trust she'd never felt before. For the first time, she no longer felt like she was fighting the world by herself. That afternoon, as they stepped out of the courthouse, the golden sunlight poured down like a promise of a new beginning. Grace skipped between them, holding her mother's hand on one side and Adrian's on the other. "Mommy, did we win?" Grace asked, her eyes shining. Elena nodded, bending down to kiss her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. We won, and we'll always be together." Adrian looked at them, his heart overflowing. He didn't need business triumphs or vast fortunes. This moment holding the hands of two precious souls was the greatest victory of his life. Softly, almost as a vow to himself, he whispered, "This is the family I want to protect. Forever." And in that radiant sunset, amidst tears and laughter, a new family was truly born. This time, nothing could tear them apart. The house in Ravenna that Adrian had once mentioned finally became their home. After the trial, when all the paperwork was complete, Eleanor agreed to move in with Grace. The modest two-story house, with its white picket fence and a shady apple tree in the front yard, wasn't as grand as the mansions Adrian had lived in before, but it breathed warmth, the essence of a real home. On moving day, Grace ran from room to room squealing, "Mr. Adrian, Mommy, I have my own room, and a window to sit and read by." She bounced onto her new bed, hugging her old doll tight, her eyes sparkling with happiness. Elena stood in the doorway, smiling. The long, fearful nights of almost losing Grace were over, and for the first time in years she could breathe freely. From the kitchen below, Adrian called out, voice full of excitement, "Who's up for homemade pizza tonight?" "Me! I want to help with the toppings," Grace shouted back. Elena laughed and hurried downstairs. Adrian had his sleeves rolled up, flour smudged on his cheek, looking every bit the amateur chef. The sight, so simple, so genuine, warmed her heart. The days that followed slowly settled into a new rhythm. Every morning, Adrian drove Grace to school before heading to work. Each time she hopped out of the car, Grace planted a kiss on his cheek and whispered, "Bye-bye, Daddy Adrian." The first time she called him that, Elena was startled. She almost corrected her, but Adrian just smiled, his eyes misty. "If that's what she wants to call me, I have no reason to refuse." In the evenings, the three of them gathered around the dinner table. Elena cooked, Adrian washed the dishes, and Grace darted around the living room, singing. Small, ordinary things, but to Elena, they were luxuries she had never known. Weekends were for outings, sometimes to the park, sometimes the children's museum, and occasionally the beach to build sandcastles. In those moments, Elena saw Grace's laughter grow freer, her little world brighter. No trace of sorrow left behind. One crisp autumn evening, after a cozy family dinner, Adrian turned to Grace. "Do you want to help me prepare a surprise for your mom?" Grace's eyes lit up. "Is it a secret?" "Yes, a sweet one." Together, they transformed the living room. Adrian lit scented candles and placed a vase of white chrysanthemums, Elena's favorite, on the table. Grace busied herself drawing a card, a wobbly picture of three people holding hands under a little house, with big block letters scrawled across the top. "Family forever." When Elena stepped in from the kitchen, she froze. The room glowed softly with candlelight, filled with the gentle scent of flowers. Grace rushed to her, hiding the card behind her back. "Mommy, sit down," she giggled. Adrian stepped forward, kneeling before Elena. In his hand was a simple ring, not flashy, just a silver band with a small stone. "Elena," his voice was warm, though it trembled slightly, "I can't promise you extravagant parties or glamorous trips. But I promise you and Grace a home, one built on honesty, trust, and love. Will you marry me?" Elena's hand flew to her mouth, stunned. Memories flooded her. Lonely nights clutching Grace close, the fear of losing her. And then Adrian, patient, steadfast, standing by her side, fighting for her. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. Before she could speak, Grace bounced up and down, shouting, "Yes, yes, Mommy, say yes!" Her innocent cheer made everyone laugh. Elena looked into Adrian's eyes, saw the hope and unguarded love shining there. She nodded, her voice shaking. "Yes, I will." Adrian let out a relieved breath, slipped the ring onto her finger, and pulled both Elena and Grace into his arms. Grace, caught in the middle, squealed with laughter. Now we're really a family. That night, after Grace was fast asleep, Elena and Adrian sat together on the porch. The moonlight washed over them, autumn breezes rustling the apple tree in the yard. I used to think, Elena whispered, that I could never trust anyone again. But you, step by step, you proved me wrong. You're not just my support, you've become part of this life. Adrian held her close, kissing the top of her head. I used to think I'd never find a real family. But then I met you and Grace. Now I know this is the most precious thing I'll ever have. They sat in quiet stillness, listening to the steady breath of the sleeping house, peace wrapping around them like a blanket. Months later, the Ravenna house rang with laughter. In the yard, Grace soared high on the swing Adrian had built, shouting, "Higher, Daddy Adrian, higher!" Elena stood nearby, her hand resting on her belly where new life was quietly growing. She smiled as she watched Adrian pushing Grace, her heart swelling at the sight of a family finally whole. In that moment, Elena realized the storms had passed. The wounds were healing. What remained was trust, love, and a true home. And just as Adrian had once said, this was the greatest victory of all.